Hello history friends and welcome back to Cabinet of Curiosity, where this week we are warming up our embouchures and emptying spit valves of knowledge onto the rehearsal room carpet of ignorance. Blah. Today our very special guest is this. This is a tenor or alto horn, a smallish member of the sax horn family. This instrument was manufactured between about 1926 and about 1931 and was donated to the museum in the 1970s. And as you can see, it has had a very eventful life, possibly involving being dropped numerous times. The interesting thing about this instrument is that it was invented and manufactured specifically for playing in a brass band. Most of us know what a brass band is. It's the very loud, cheerful, shiny thing that does the parades with the buttons and the hats and the Sunday afternoon in the park, etc. But why brass bands, though? I like loud, shiny objects as much as anybody else. Probably more. But why not cello bands, or xylophone bands, or the majestic and ever-popular nose flute? The answer, as usual, is the Industrial Revolution. From the Middle Ages to about 200 years ago, horns and trumpets looked like this, a length of metal tubing with a bell at one end and a mouthpiece at the other. They got more sophisticated as the years went by, but in order to play the different notes, you had to do extremely complicated things with your lips, wave your hands around in the bell, or switch out bits of the instrument between pieces, often all at the same time. But then, at the beginning of the 19th century, a horn player named Heinrich Stölzl invented these, the first valves, which changed the flow of air inside the instrument quickly and produced much more reliable and consistent notes. Changes in manufacturing and design in the 19th century also made brass instruments lighter, cheaper, and more compact. And because they were made of metal, they were durable and easy to transport, and could be played indoors or outdoors in a variety of climates, which was handy when you had an enormous empire to run. There was also a moral dimension to a brass band. Social reformers like the Salvation Army believed that playing and listening to classical music would elevate the minds of the working classes and prevent antisocial behavior, like drinking or gambling or dogfighting or whatever it was the poor people did in their spare time. Factory and mine owners also sponsored bands, partly for the free advertising and partly to prevent another annoying working class habit, that of forming unions. Give the workers a band, the theory went, and they'd be so busy marching they wouldn't have time for Marx-ing. By the 1890s, there were literally tens of thousands of them, with every town, church, mill, mine, factory, and even orphanage equipped with its own brass band. At the turn of the century, Italian bands in particular exploded in popularity in North America, partly due to a huge influx of Italian immigration. One particularly notable band leader was this guy, Giuseppe Creatore. Originally from Naples, the great Creatore's exotic appeal and extreme conducting style created a sensation. The papers told of Creatore hypnotizing his band with wildly dramatic gestures and whipping his audiences into an ecstatic frenzy, especially the women, who reportedly writhed hysterically and jumped on top of tables. Another, less dramatic and famous Italian import was a man named Camilo Zaccaro, an accomplished saxophonist who arrived as a shoemaker at Ellis Island in 1895, but quickly found work as a musician and band conductor. By 1910, he was playing in a band in Los Angeles, California, but for some unknowable reason, decided to migrate north to a small coal mining town in the Rockies of British Columbia. Professor Zaccaro, as he was known, arrived in Fernie in the summer of 1910 and immediately established himself as one of the most accomplished musicians in the area, and the new director of the Fernie Italian or City Band. The Fernie Italian Band had been established in 1904, but they badly needed a new director because they played a lot. On top of at least one public concert a week, they also played for almost every community event, including parades, sports days, picnics, political rallies, dances, and funerals. But one of their most important jobs was playing at competitions. Bands that won a regional competition were a huge source of pride for their town, and, more importantly, the prize money was shared amongst the band members, which helped to supplement the pay from their regular jobs. In August of 1911, the Fernie Band competed at Lethbridge and won the first prize of $350, approximately $8,000 today. In 1913, yet another band emerged, calling itself the Fernie Coal Creek Excelsior Brass Band. Now, the Italian band, like most traditional European bands, used brass and woodwind instruments, like piccolos, oboes, and clarinets. This new Excelsior band, on the other hand, was founded as a traditional English brass band. No reeds, no flutes, brass instruments only. They also made a point of only including English-speaking men. At first, relations between the two bands seemed cordial. In the summer of 1914, the First World War started, accompanied by a flurry of parades and patriotic events, and there was more than enough banding to go around. But then, in September of 1914, things got interesting. The city council had allocated $600 for bands, and rather than giving out $300 each, as they had promised earlier in the year, they decided to give $500 to the Italian band and only $100 to the Coal Creek band. Exactly why they did this, nobody knows, but naturally, drama ensued. Petitions were signed, arguments were argued. The Excelsior band, thoroughly put out, pointedly donated their $100 to the Fernie Hospital Fund as a snub to the city council and went on fundraising on their own. The papers buzzed with letters to the editor, one of which stated, "Our objection to the Italian band is the bandmaster, and just as the British nation today is determined to free Europe from the Kaiser's rule, so is the English-speaking band of Fernie determined to have an English-speaking director, whose tongue they understand and who will not be able to ridicule and abuse them in a foreign language for the benefit of foreign-speaking members. It is certainly a most humiliating sight for the English-speaking citizens to know that their recreation, as well as their morals, are practically in the hands and at the mercy of a foreign-speaking individual." Professor Zaccaro, perhaps discouraged by all the squabbling, left Fernie at the end of September and went back to nice, quiet Los Angeles. By May of 1915, after more muted antagonism, and one prominent local commenting publicly that the Excelsior band should be supported because, after all, they were the only white band in the district, the city council attempted to coax the two bands into amalgamating. All 25 members of the Italian band were in favor, but the Excelsior band remained stubbornly opposed. By 1916, things seemed to have quietened down significantly. This might have been because people finally saw the error of their ways, but it was probably because members of both bands had gone off to fight in the war, and there were so few musicians left that they had to play in both bands out of necessity. Professor Zaccaro even came back briefly after the war and played a couple of concerts in 1919 at the head of a brand new, reorganized Fernie City band. But it didn't last. By the beginning of 1921, Zaccaro had a new job back in California and had left Fernie for good. After the Battle of the Bands died down, this new amalgamated band presumably honked and tootled merrily along, if not quietly, then at least without anything newsworthy, until the late 1930s, when, under the guidance of Frank Vernon, the local postmaster, they won a flurry of prizes, trophies, and shields at regional competitions. In the second half of the 20th century, membership in amateur brass bands slowly dwindled. There were still bands in the military, of course, and in high schools to give the weird kids something to do. But brass banding for amateur grown-ups became a much more unusual hobby than it had been in the 19th century. Partly this was because community organizations in general were disappearing, and partly because people had new indoor leisure activities, which involved more television and less standing around in fields. In any case, many bands, including the Fernie one, were dissolved, bandstands were torn down, and venerable instruments like this one were put into storage, and eventually donated to museums, where people like me could make videos about them. I guess not many people want to put on funny hats and learn the euphonium anymore, buddy. What a shame. But I still have hope for the nose flute.